Hello, bonjour and welcome to your new Bonheur Private Wines video. We've covered here a few grape varieties in our wine video series over time, like Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Merlot and Chardonnay, to talk about their main characteristics and simply what they taste like, which countries and regions make the best examples, these sort of things. But I realize I haven't really made a dedicated video about what is probably our favorite grape variety here at the club, especially when it's from extreme altitude vineyards and from Argentina. Of course, I'm talking about Malbec. Sure, I've talked about it a few times here while talking about and tasting the wine gems that we regularly find for you and send you, but let's make sure today you get to know everything that you need to know about Malbec. Let's go. Malbec is certainly most associated with Argentina. When it comes to wine, in fact, Argentina and Malbec are almost synonymous, and this is because, as we'll see in a moment when we talk about where else Malbec is grown, well, Argentina is by far now the biggest producer of Malbec in the world. In fact, if it wasn't for Argentina, Malbec would possibly have been completely forgotten about and gone by now. You might have heard that the Malbec grape variety originates from France. Like most of the grapes that are grown internationally, it is French originally. What you might not have known is that it originated from Bordeaux, the famous French wine region that also bred and gave us Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Malbec is one of the 5 red grapes that is allowed to be blended together, or that are allowed to be blended together to make Bordeaux wine in what we call the traditional Bordeaux blend. You may have heard this expression in the US a lot, call it meritage. But Malbec was never really suited to the terroir of Bordeaux. The soil is a little bit too rich for it there, and the climate a little too cold for Malbec. So Malbec vines in Bordeaux end up producing a lot of wine with high yields, but making rather diluted wines that can be a little bit harsh, and that is really not compatible with the quality associated with Bordeaux wine. On top of that, during the 18th century, the vineyards of Bordeaux were decimated by a bug called phylloxera. That was a huge historical viticultural crisis back then. When they replanted after that, most growers in Bordeaux didn't replant Malbec because it wasn't so good, and they favored Cabernet and Merlot. Pragmatic people, aren't they? If there was anything left of Malbec there in the 20th century, a huge frost also destroyed many Bordeaux vineyards back in 1956, which finished virtually eliminating Malbec entirely from the vineyards of Bordeaux. Now, a fun fact from history though, while this Malbec tragedy was unfolding in France, a French agronomist named Michel-Aimé Pouget had been exiled from France after Napoleon did his famous coup d'etat, taking over the country after the French Revolution. So Pouget couldn't live in France anymore, or he couldn't apply his viticultural and agricultural skills there, so he immigrated to South America, exiled. He demonstrated his talent for vine growing in South America, and he immensely helped the development of viticulture in both Chile and Argentina. Another mistake made by Napoleon, but another one that turned out to be a good thing for the rest of the world, as Pouget eventually introduced Malbec to Argentina, to the famous region of Mendoza, where it was initially planted in Argentina. From there it spread around and became Argentina's flagship grape, grown everywhere around the country. Napoleon and Argentina did save Malbec. You've tasted Malbec for yourself before a few times with the club, and we send you excellent and typical examples at that, so you know what Malbec tastes like. So I probably don't need to elaborate a lot here, but here are a few key features wine experts acknowledge broadly as being characteristics of this wine. Things to look out for if you're also ever tasting blind and trying to recognize what grape variety this might be. So the base of Malbec aromas and flavors are on the fruity side, obviously with those ripe plum, dark red berries, the black cherries, the blueberry, raisin a bit sometimes as well, but there's always with Malbec important background notes of cocoa and milk chocolate. There's a bit of coffee with generally a little greener tones as well, like green stems, and I find blonde tobacco often in it as well. But what really stands out for me with Malbec, and what we really can give it away when tasting blind, is what we call a sense of meatiness on the palate. There's always some really discreet but real flavors of meat stock, subtle but present in the background, which give the wine some really juiciness, some saltiness as well, and it makes you salivate and enjoy the wine because there's this additional layer. Tannins are dense and large with Malbec, but generally not as densely compact a structure when you taste it as a Cabernet or a Merlot. There's loads of tannins, but they're rather big and a little maybe looser than with some other grapes like Cabernet or Syrah. All of this renders Malbec wines really attractive and food friendly. Talking about food friendliness, these characteristics give Malbec the uncommon ability for a wine to pair well with foods that have a lot of umami flavors. Umami is this flavor type that is found in some specific foods like mushrooms, soy sauce, cured meats, or certain cheeses. While some fruity wines struggle with this type of really savory umami flavors, Malbec thrives, absolutely thrives with this type of pairings. So Malbec is overall a very versatile wine with savory foods and even with those slightly funky mushroomy dishes or cheeses, or even with green vegetables, which a lot of red wines don't really always love going with. Finally, you may have noticed that Malbec wines are generally not all that oaky, and that's because one, the wine is by itself big and powerful, so oak hardly ever overpowers the wine, or you never feel it so strongly. But also number two, because winemakers don't need to overdo it with oak flavors in Malbec. It's acknowledged generally that oak does not improve Malbec all that much, so why would you? It could also be partly because in Argentina, French oak is extremely expensive to import, and that's in the end a good thing for the authenticity of the wines because they're let to speak for themselves. Argentina is by far the largest producer of Malbec, with more than 75,000 acres that are planted. That's a lot, it's hard to imagine, but yes, it's a lot. France still makes some Malbec, but for a reference, they grow only 15,000 acres of it, so that's 5 times less, which is telling because France is often number one at a lot of things when it comes to wine, right? But not for Malbec. Briefly, in Argentina, Malbec is grown, well, everywhere around the country, which of course, Mendoza is the biggest wine area in the country and the biggest producer of Malbec, and it is located around the center of the country to the east. Now, south of Argentina is Patagonia, one of the southernmost wine regions in the world, and they make rather crisp and fragrant Malbec there as well. If you go a little north of Mendoza is what's called San Juan, that makes some nice ones as well, but of course the best Malbec in Argentina come from the north and the province of Salta, that is dear to our hearts, especially when it's grown at extreme altitude vineyards as in Cafayate and the Calchaquí Valley. Now, outside of Argentina, Malbec is mainly grown in France, where it is generally blended rather anonymously into red blends from the southwest of the country and the Loire Valley. Where Malbec shines for itself in France, though, is around a small village in the southwest that is not too far from Bordeaux, relatively speaking, called Cahors. What's interesting is that because of the popularity of Argentine Malbec over the past 20 years or so, the growing popularity, the fame of Malbec from Argentina, people also internationally started looking into the wines of Cahors that were kind of forgotten about before on the international wine scene. Only the French knew about it, but now everyone looks at them. No one cared about Cahors, but now, thanks to Argentina, wine connoisseurs are curious to try a French Malbec, and Cahors wines are good examples. They're generally a little denser and tighter than the Malbecs from Argentina because it's way cooler there. They're spicier as well, a bit drier, a bit ashier as well, but still with this signature meatiness and food friendliness that is so characteristic of Malbec. Cahors wines are worth trying. To finish, let's say that outside of France and Argentina, Malbec is relatively anecdotal. It is grown in the US, it is grown in Chile, it is grown in South Africa, in Australia, or even New Zealand, but in relatively small quantities there. Of course, you'll have the odd single vineyard varietal bottling that you may occasionally find from those countries, but really they're not common. Malbec is there in those countries more of a blending component in Bordeaux-style blends, to which it adds the body, it adds some color, it adds this unique umami meaty feel that is so pleasing from it. So they use it as a blending component there. So you don't see it on labels all that often. And that's it. This is everything that you should know about the wonderful grape that is Malbec, summarized for you here. I'll leave it here for today, and thanks for watching, and I will see you soon in the wonderful world of wine. Cheers.